Welcome to another episode with your chapter crush sweetheart. This is Everblue Presents When You're Enough, a chapter crush sweetheart series. Bronwyn, Chapter 5. I've always felt that I can't afford to be imperfect. Chianvay, Legally Romance. My face blanched, my mouth drying in response as I looked at the handmade roommate guide I'd left on his bed yesterday. It's just, something that I do for my new roommates. How could I forget I left it in his room? It had only taken me a couple of hours over the course of several early mornings to make the book. I was proud of the way it turned out, but seeing the delicate-looking book with its pink camellias and green stalks sprayed across the cover being held in his big hands, I cringed, fully expecting his judgment. His gaze narrowed, bouncing between me and the book. Why is it in Swiss German? I cleared my throat as I flipped my curls to the other side of my head. I thought you were Swiss. You know, when I found out you were from the Geneva office. Apparently, that admission wasn't enough for him because he smirked. You thought I was Swiss and a woman. Is that why there's a whole section on where to buy the best feminine products? Okay, I died of shame. My face flamed as I leaned over and snatched the book out of the ingrate's hand. There was also stuff about where to get groceries, I muttered, along with lists of the best local restaurants and bars. He pinned that turbulent gaze of his on me. I thought it was mine. I tucked the book firmly against my side. I'll save it for my next roommate, I gritted out. We are decidedly not compatible. Michel lazily gestured towards the book. What about the else rules? I can print it out in English, I huffed. His condescending smile prickled my nerves. Why, I can read Swiss German just fine. Of course you can, I muttered in Mandarin. Flipping through the guide, I found the appropriate page, ripped it out, and shoved it in his direction. Now, if that's all, why do you do that? Why do you hold back from speaking your mind? He asked incisively, his dark brow furrowed. I chuckled, feeling as if I were on the edge of sanity. Why does he keep pushing my buttons? Why do you continue to let him? Ignoring that traitorous little voice, I forged on. I try to see all sides. Sometimes it isn't worth it to push a point. Michel arched a brow. It's always worth it to see another person's point of view. But no, I think you hold back because you're selfish. Sheer indignation had me clutching my pearls. Excuse me? Rather than being accusatory, his voice was matter-of-fact, certain. It enraged me more. You want to preserve yourself, but that improves no one. Not the other person, and certainly not yourself. You have the right to feel what you feel and to explain how you feel. Maybe you learn something, maybe you won't, but the point is communicate, because you'll never know if an interaction could have been better if you don't even try to be part of the conversation. Closing my mouth, I gripped my hair at the base of my neck before looking up at him. Was I angry? Absolutely, but it was about 50% him and 50% me, because I knew it was true. It didn't mean I was willing to sit there being dissected, so my voice was calm, belying the feelings raging in my heart. Well, Michel, you certainly have no problem communicating. You don't hold back at all. Yet, rather than gloat over his superior communication skills as I thought he would, he smiled a bit sadly. If I didn't hold back at all, I would say your lack of communication is lazy and detrimental to your relationships. You aren't close to other people, are you? Having been flayed open and thoroughly exposed, I could only stare at him with my mouth open. It's hard to describe the feeling of having no place to hide. The anger that I had been holding in once again bloomed hot in my chest. My control over it was hanging by a thread, but I held on with all my might. Bad things happen when I unleash it, and I'm much too emotionally drained to deal with the aftermath. Yet, the man went and added insult to injury. I'd been staring at Michel, waiting for him to backpedal or try to explain himself, but he didn't flinch. Instead, the ant licker waited on me with a little smile on his face, and I could feel that last thread of control unraveling as I smiled in response. Wow, Michel, you've certainly got me pegged in the last, 12 hours or so of our acquaintance, selfish, lazy, and closed off. For the first time, his smile wobbled, but shaking my head, I carried my dishes to the sink. After cleaning up, I was a bit calmer when I crossed back to the table to pick up the notebook. Yet, the bewildered expression engraved on his face caused me to grimace. Once again, the rage bubbled up when I finally turned to face him and quietly spoke, my voice ice cold. Since we're crossing into new territory here, and I'm not sure what it officially looks like because I've never been here before, I want you to consider this. I leaned on the table with one hand as I looked him dead in the eye. Your daughter is going to be here for at least 26 weeks out of the next year. And while I respect your right to eat alone, I won't tiptoe around my own home. So rather than insulting my character, maybe you should try to actually get to know the person who'll be spending nearly as much time in Dorian's vicinity as you. Michel visibly swallowed, but when he opened his mouth, I held up my hand. He unleashed her, so he had to deal with it. I thank you so much for this psychotherapy session. It was truly something. Yet, while it may have been freely given, I have more than paid for it in time and attention. So let's you and I never do that again, okay? Standing up, I stared him down. If you need anything from me, send a message or write it on the pad on the refrigerator. Whether or not I'm willing to oblige your request will be communicated in the same fashion. As of right now, we're two ships passing in the night. Don't call me, I'll call you. With that, I stormed from the room. In hindsight, I realize he may have fallen back on some sort of coping mechanism, trying to push me as far away from him as possible. Yet it worked too well. It's times like these I wish I could punch something. Bryony would make bread right about now. Ugh, I'm so wound up. There's only one thing to do for it. After wrapping a silk scarf around my hair to protect the curls, I changed into my old house dress and began cleaning my room, which is really saying something. Bryony always says my oversized yellow muumuu makes me look like someone's old nana, but it's honestly the most comfortable thing to clean in without anything pinching, scratching, or poking as I get down into nooks and crannies. And wow, does my room need the elbow grease. While my bathroom is in the constant cleaning rotation, my bedroom is decidedly not. I should say it gets the same amount of dusting, sweeping, and mopping as everywhere else, but while the rest of the apartment is pristine, there are a lot more piles in here. Clean clothes, bills, dirty cups, a stack of cinnamon candles? Oh, I bought those last year during a fleeting candle obsession. Yeah, it's quite a bit to manage, and by the time I check the time, it's well after 1 p.m. But it's clean. I proudly look around my room, however, the joy is fleeting. As soon as I step into the kitchen to heat up some soup for lunch, I'm instantly transported back to this morning. Just like that, all of my hard-won peace is out the window. At least Michel won't be back until later. Tonight is family dinner at the Sullivan house, and I've never been more grateful for the bi-weekly arrangement. If it wouldn't draw so much attention, I might suggest that it be a weekly arrangement under the present circumstances. But that would be a sure way to get Tanya and Joe Sullivan up in my business, something I really don't need at the moment. Sighing, I clean up what I used and retreat to my bedroom. Looks like I'll be spending more time in there than I originally thought. Yet, on the way past the music room, I paused before stepping inside. Slowly approaching the piano, a black baby grand that Mr. Matisse had gifted to his wife Julia on their 35th wedding anniversary, I run a hand on the shiny black surface before propping up the lid. Taking a seat at the bench, I lift the fallboard, reverently running a hand over the familiar black and white keys. Hello, old friend. I smile sadly. Let's have a good workout today. With that, I play the first note of Beethoven's Ninth in D minor and let the music take over. It's been 19 years since I first became acquainted with this piano, and she plays just as beautifully as she did from the first key I touched. My school had a program that offered scholarships to the illustrious New York Music School, where youths with a talent in music can attend classes for free. Having been enrolled in music classes from the time I started school, I had demonstrated a talent for both the piano and cello. The violin didn't come until much later, after I was accepted to NYMS. There, I was enrolled in 3 45-minute after-school classes that met every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. I remember the music theory and cello classes were fun and exciting, perhaps because my parents were able to rent a cello for me to practice with at home, so I excelled. I expected the same from my piano class as well. Yet, from the moment I walked into the little gray practice room, which was completely bare except for the grand piano and bench, I was slowly and consistently tortured. I'll never forget clapping eyes on the frizzy haired elderly blonde woman with bright green eyes who didn't stand much taller than my 10-year-old frame. Unbeknownst to me at the time, she had recently celebrated her 80th birthday, but she was so spry and fashionable, it was easy to assume she was 20 years younger. She introduced herself as Mrs. Matisse, saying that she would be my piano instructor, and I noticed her voice had a lyrical quality, one that I wasn't familiar with. When I asked about it, she frowned and came to stand beside me. Are you here to work or to chat, ma chérie? She asked, her brow wrinkled, but eyes alight with curiosity. I smiled. I'm here to work, Mrs. Matisse. She nodded firmly, then hesitated beside me when I held up my hand. Yes, not being a fan of correcting people since it hardly goes well. I was hesitant to say anything, but I also knew I couldn't sit through a class being called by the wrong name. My name is Bronwyn Sullivan, not my Sherry. Mrs. Matisse folded her arms and sat beside me on the bench. Thank you, Bronwyn. Since you asked before about my accent, I think now is a good time to let you know that I am from a country called France. Have you heard of it? I slowly nodded in response, unsure of what to say. Yes, some of the kids in my class went there for summer vacation. For the first time, she flashed a small smile. Good. In France, we speak a language called French. It is different from English, but it is beautiful, full of passion and life. That is why we find little ways to express our feelings, even without saying them directly. One way is by using little words to let a person know we see them. Their words are important or valued. Ma chérie isn't a name, but a term that means my dear. Do you understand? When I nodded in response, she said, with your words, ma chérie, God gave them to you for you to use. Yes, Mrs. Matisse. Excellent, she exclaimed, clapping her hands together as she popped up from the bench. Now we have used 5 minutes of your class chatting, but you said you are here to work, so here's what we will do. When you get home, you'll practice for an extra hour to make up for the lost 5 minutes. I nearly fell off the bench. But Mrs. Matisse, I don't have a piano at home. She pursed her lips as she contemplated me for a moment. Then you will practice the keys on your bed and imagine the sound. Work is not easy, but it pays rich rewards. All right? Now, shall we begin? Unwilling to add any more homework time, I nodded and we began. From that moment on, she never sat during a session, and I saved all of my questions for outside of the practice room. Not that all of that work was doing me any good. I frowned as I transitioned from Beethoven to Chopin's Nocturne 1 in B flat minor. I enjoyed the piano, I truly did, but I kept failing to understand the concept of musical expression or the story and emotion of the pieces. Which is why, even if my execution was technically perfect, Mrs. Matisse still wasn't happy with it. So it was only a month after beginning my classes that Mrs. Matisse ended my Thursday class with yet another frown. When she handed me a letter instructing me to give it to my parents, I panicked. Would I be kicked out? I could do better. I knew I could, if I could just figure out that elusive emotional element. I was relieved when she said she was looking for a way to give me more help, not less. Still, I trudged out to the car, where Dad always waited to pick me up, and delivered the note to him. I remember being fairly quiet on the ride home from the school on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, all the way back home to our brownstone in the quiet neighborhood of Brooklyn Heights. Dad gave up trying to figure out what was wrong and turned on the radio so we could sing along like we usually did. I wasn't even in the mood to do that. I was the good girl. Bryony was the one who got in trouble in school for talking or passing notes, so it felt like a big deal to be sent home with a note from the teacher. Yet, when we got back to our brownstone, nothing happened. In fact, the weekend went on as we engaged in our usual activities. It wasn't until that Sunday when Mom came into our room and handed me a letter from Mrs. Matisse. That was when she told me that I would be going to Mrs. Matisse's house after my music classes for an additional hour on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm not going to lie. It felt like punishment for not being outstanding enough. Yet, when class ended on that first Tuesday, instead of walking out to meet Dad, I shuffled along in the crisp autumn air behind Mrs. Matisse and her white-haired husband as he came to walk her the 5 blocks to their apartment. They always walked arm in arm, chatting as if they couldn't wait to spill all the details of what happened in their time apart. It was adorable, and I found myself looking forward to those walks. I don't remember much else about Mr. Matisse, as he was a quiet man, but I do remember he'd always have a small plate of madeleines and a glass of milk for me, and a cup of tea for Mrs. Matisse ready in the breakfast nook when we arrived. He'd then disappear somewhere else in the apartment as we chatted for the 15 minutes or so it took to devour our snack. Then it was off to work. My fingers paused on the keys as the memories of the days that turned into seasons flashed through my mind. Inexplicably, I began playing Mozart's Piano Concerto Number 20 in D minor. When Mr. Matisse died 2 years later of a massive heart attack, Mrs. Matisse was heartbroken. By then, my lessons included the old violin that belonged to Mr. Matisse. I'll never forget how she'd excuse herself from the music room when I played certain pieces. By then, I had long finished the program that introduced us. However, after begging my parents, they agreed to pay for me to continue my lessons twice a week at the Matisse home. Of course, it was after getting Mrs. Matisse to accept the payments in the first place. What I discovered about the woman in our little chats was that she didn't teach because she required a financial incentive. It was always about the music. She loved it as a child in France, and when she and her husband immigrated to the States shortly after World War II ended, music was the one skill she was able to carry with her. So she began working as a music teacher, while Mr. Matisse taught math in a local high school. Oftentimes, I would arrive for my lessons to see Mrs. Matisse cleaning in her frock, as she called it. When I began helping her before beginning my lessons, she'd always tut, saying it was her work to do. She'd then tell the story of how Mr. Matisse would tease her. Their building was built in 1926, apparently the same year Mrs. Matisse was born. So Mr. Matisse had a habit of saying she was aging like a fine building. She would laugh before saying it's the reason why keeping up the apartment was so important to her. Her personal care is what made it a home, which is why she would never hire anyone to clean. Eventually, she no longer tutted when I had help. It was just a few months after Mr. Matisse died when the next school year began. At the age of 12, we were offered the opportunity to choose which language we wanted to study for the next 2 years. Seeing Mrs. Matisse, often with a faraway look in her eyes during our music lessons, I could tell that she was lonely. The elderly couple never had children, and many of their friends had died by that time. So, without saying a word to her, I signed up for French class. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of telling her about the class before I had really learned anything. Of course, to Mrs. Matisse, it was unacceptable that I shouldn't learn in full sentences, rather than word by word, as she once exclaimed over in outrage. Thus began the transition from Mrs. Matisse, music teacher, to Miss Julia, music and French teacher.